everybody. Welcome to Rachel's Reviews. I'm so excited today to be here to be talking about the our favorite animated films from the last decade, the 2010 to 2019. And there's been a lot of animated films. It's been a busy time for the medium, and so it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about. I'm film critic Rachel Wagner, and I have two very special guests that are going to help to have this discussion. I have my good friend Mike from Cartoon Karma is here, and thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely.
Yes, and then I also have my fellow YouTuber Ryan Cam is here, first time I think on the podcast. And Ryan, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. This is my first time and hopefully not the last.
Yes, that's right. Very good. All right. So what we did is we each came up with our top five. And was this a difficult task for you, or did you pretty much have your top five ready to go? What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I thought it would be more difficult, but honestly, they just sort of dropped into my lap. They fell out of the sky, you know. I was surprised as you are.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Ryan?
It was very difficult for me because I was pouring through IMDb lists of top animated films of the 2010s, and I'm like, loved that, definitely loved that. Like, if this list were expanded to 25, like, I would not be spoiled for choice, or I would be spoiled for choice.
Yeah.
But cutting it to 5, it was borderline heartbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I think maybe we take for granted a little bit now, is that there's just so much volume of animated films, of all films, all different types. There's so many. I mean, I think way back into the day in the 80s when I was a kid, and we would get one or two a year animated films, and here we get on a regular basis over 30 that get a decent rollout. It's pretty amazing, and so there's a lot to choose from.
I suppose another thing that makes this decade especially good in that regard is in pretty much every previous one you really only had Disney and / or Pixar that really provided the good stuff, the stuff that most people loved. But this is the first time that we have several studios producing lots of good or great work consistently. It's on the one hand, obviously you do have a lot of commercial producty tripe. I'd be very surprised if any of us pick anything from Illumination, for one thing.
Right.
But on the other hand, you have as I say, lots of studios producing great work.
Yeah, no, it's true. And in the past, animation was kind of always a two horse race, whether it was Don Bluth and Disney, or DreamWorks and Disney, or Warner Brothers and Disney, depending on the era. And now it is a lot more splintered up, which is nice.
It's a lot more diverse.
I'm pretty sure if we were doing this list for the 2000s, most of us, our lists would just be dominated by Pixar films.
For the 90s?
No, 2000s.
Oh, 2000s, yeah, for sure. And Ghibli, Studio Ghibli, I think.
Oh, yeah.
For me.
Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah. That's a fair point.
Yeah, that was a strong time for them. But yeah, so, all right. Well, I'm going to start. In my number 5 is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So Sony Animation coming through with an incredible film. The style of it was just so dazzling to me. I absolutely loved just watching the movie for the visuals alone. When he has his first sort of flight, was just, that leap scene is just incredible. And it's also like really funny. It's very surprising, the whole idea of the Spider-Verse with the Spider-Ham and film noir Spider-Man. And I actually also really like Miles as a character. I think that his relationship with his dad, his relationship with his uncle, I thought gave the movie a lot of heart. And it was a dazzling film. And it's pretty hard to be inventive in the comic book genre, but also be inventive in the medium of animation, and so it had to make my list.
That's an excellent choice.
Yeah. And so I will, if I guess we have to wait and see what's everyone else's choice, but I don't know. Do you think that this movie was worthy of the hype that it got?
Absolutely.
Unquestionably, when you look at the end result, yeah.
Yeah. I just loved it. I thought it. I wish it was just always at the theater so I could just see it all the time. It was.
I think it's still on Netflix. Am I right?
Is it on Netflix? I don't know, but it probably is. But it's just seeing it on the big screen is just such an amazing experience. All right. Well, Mike, what is your number 5?
So just before I get into it, when I was putting this list together, I had 2 sort of personal ground rules. The first was only 1 film per studio, although that didn't end up factoring into it too much. The other one is that my list isn't like necessarily the same as an objective list. Like when I say objective, I mean like, okay, this film actually is better than that, but that one ranks higher. So sometimes personal preference outweighs whether a film is actually better or not. Like there's one in here that would definitely be higher otherwise. Anyway, so my number 5 is Shaun the Sheep movie.
Oh, really?
Fun. Yeah.
Aardman, yeah. Nice poll.
Yeah. I mean, Aardman, they definitely had a fine decade. They've produced a fair few films. Arthur Christmas is a very good Christmassy one. The Pirates Adventure with Scientists, or Band of Misfits as it's known in the States. That's a very silly romp, very delightfully funny. And then Early Man is a little slight for them, but still perfectly fine and enjoyable. And actually, recently they put out the Shaun the Sheep sequel, since it's not out in the States yet.
Yeah, it's so weird.
Neither of you would have seen it, but I have, and it's not as brilliant as the first film. It feels a little more slight, if that makes sense, as some sequels do. But it's, on the other hand, there's nothing wrong with it, and it's still it has much of the strengths of this one. But just on Shaun the Sheep film, so in many ways, I think this film is like the modern equivalent of the original Winnie the Pooh film. Like on many levels, it's aimed at the very young, like the toddler set, or those that are only just learning to read. Like all the wordplay in the film is sort of a 4-year-old mindset, if that makes sense. But on the other hand, it's crafted with such, care, such attention to detail, that it really does make you want to be a kid again. Like the comic timing of the beats is perfect. Moments holding just not enough, reactions being the same. It has the same visual wish that any Aardman film does, and it even gets very poignant and tender at the right moments. I don't know. I just love it. I really do.
It's so good. Yeah.
I love how there's almost no dialogue in that whole movie, and every emotion has to be conveyed with the face. I like the spirit of that.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting because there is no dialogue, but it's not a silent film. Like the various language of vocal bleats and blahs they have still play an important part in the delivery. So.
But a lot of the comic timing has sort of the feel of Buster Keaton
or absolutely.
Charlie Chaplin, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, it's the same sort of thing that the first half or hour of WALL-E trafficked in a lot.
Yeah, I like that sort of broad comedy, like when they're just the whole scene when they're ordering dinner, when they're at the restaurant. That scene is so funny.
That makes that scene is so much farting humor and whatever, and it makes it much funnier than farting humor really has a right to be.
Right. Yeah, agreed. I also like the whole when he invents the haircut. Like that's also really cute and funny.
Oh yeah. They take a subplot that seems like a step past the bridge too far and, redeem it beautifully.
Yeah. If I had a number 6, an honorable mention, I would have picked Arthur Christmas. So I do love Aardman, and I love Christmas movies. So
there we go.
Yeah, that would have been my pick. But yeah, they do a great job over there. And I'm really looking forward to seeing Shaun the Sheep 2. I hope we finally get it released out here. It seems like I've been on my preview show. It seems like I've been previewing it for forever.
If you didn't hear, it was announced. It's going to be going straight to Netflix, I think.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah, it is a shame, but but at least it means probably more people will get to see it than if it got a theatrical release. Assuming it didn't go to Netflix afterwards, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. Yes.
It's too bad that they can't seem to. I don't know. So with stop motion, it seems like they just can't quite crack it here in the States.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It'll be interesting to see what kind of release pattern Chicken Run 2 gets in the States, because you know that's a sequel to a film that it's 20 years old, but it was a big hit at the time. So you know,
it's true. That's a good point. All right. So Ryan, what is your number 5?
Yeah. So like I said, making this list was difficult, and I thought that like a movie from a couple of studios like Laika were going to make it, and they do, but I was honestly surprised that my number 5 made it to be my number 5, and my number 5 is The Adventures of Tintin. This was directed by Steven Spielberg. We all know who he is, and it was produced by Peter Jackson, the guy who did Lord of the Rings. So steady hands behind the camera and all of that. But what I love about The Adventures of Tintin is that it's kind of like an animated Indiana Jones movie, but in the best way possible. It's got awesome action, just beautiful animation across the board. Andy Serkis is incredibly hysterical as Captain Archibald Haddock, who is like a drunk savant captain, and he's a lot of fun. Jamie Bell, who I think is really underrated as an actor, plays Tintin, and he does a great job as well. And you have Daniel Craig is really, really cool in most of the things that he's in, and he plays a pretty sinister sounding villain. And there's a lot of action in this movie too, especially with the sea battle between the pirate, and I can't remember his name right now, but and the original Captain Haddock. That scene is just so riveting to me. And so The Adventures of Tintin really didn't do well here in the States, which I was very sad about, because Tintin has been on a lot of adventures in the comics, and I want them to make more, but I have a feeling that they're not going to. But at least we have the one, and I think Adventures of Tintin is criminally underrated.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think it is a really fun, high-spirited adventure that the whole family can enjoy. And I would also say that I think it's underrated. Not only underrated as an animated film, but as a Spielberg film. I think it's one of his best in the last decade, honestly. If I was making a ranking, I don't know. What do you think, Mike, about that one?
No, those are all interesting points. It is underrated to an extent. I mean, I don't think I can argue that I can't argue that it's a Raiders of the Lost Ark level masterpiece. I can't quite go that far, but a lot of the strengths you two have pointed out is true. And as you say, you know, a lot of the sequences are vivid, and it definitely captures that Saturday matinee vibe. I mean, people have always compared Tintin to Raiders. Spielberg first noticed the property when he noticed that all the French reviews of Raiders kept mentioning the word Tintin. Of course, he couldn't read French, so he had no idea what they were saying, but he kept seeing that word pop up. Because, you know, all the reviewers kept comparing Raiders to Tintin. It was pretty funny. But yeah, it's definitely a vivid, exciting, and enchanting film. Also, it's funny, you know, sometimes how you have a particular scene from a film that just sticks with you and you have no idea why. This film has one of those. It's the scene where Daniel Craig's character is interrogating Tintin about the scroll and he doesn't have it. So he's like, "Where's the scroll? You mean the poem?" "Yes." "The poem read in Old English?" "Yes." "It was inside a cylinder?" "Yes." "Concealed in the mask?" "Yes." I don't have it.
I have to say, I have not seen this movie in a long time, so I think maybe I should do it for a family movie night, because it's.
I should probably rewatch it too. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a really long time.
I might also
I've inspired you all to rewatch it. There you go.
Yes.
I might also say there are sort of two French Belgian exports that are really popular in their homeland but never traveled to America. Tintin is one, Asterix is the other. I don't know if either of you have ever heard of it, but it's almost as brilliant.
Oh yeah, I've never heard of that.
So
Yeah, not me.
oh well, do yourself a favor, look it up online afterwards. You'll thank me later.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, that's a good choice. I wouldn't have thought of that. I like it. All right. Well, my number 4 is my Pixar selection, and it's Inside Out. I love Pete Docter. I think all 3 of his movies have been brilliant. I'm really excited for Soul coming out. But there's so many reasons why I loved Inside Out. I thought that it managed to tell 2 stories that I connected with emotionally. I mean, it's about emotions, but I loved the story arc of both the lead characters. I loved the story arc of Riley. She's forced to move, and all of a sudden she's like feeling emotionless. She's without joy. She's without sadness. She's this empty person, and she's not allowed to sort of express that to her parents because she has to be the one to brighten all their spirits. And I just thought, oh, when she comes home and she says, she tells them that she misses home, and that whole scene at the end, just, I think it's so good. And then, but you also have the arc of Joy, who, when she starts out the movie, she thinks that happiness equals fun. And as she goes about this journey with sadness, she comes to understand this deeper, and Bing Bong, and who I thought was such a brilliant character. And I mean, when Bing Bong makes his sacrifice for Riley, I just think it's, and I love little brilliant sequences, like when they go into the room of abstract thought, and they turn into the concepts, and that was just brilliant. I think it's also really funny, like when they get the facts and reasons mixed together, and when they're on the train of thought, and I don't know. I just love it. I think it is such a layered, beautifully animated. I even love how the little memory spheres are animated. The way they kind of clink together. I don't know. I just think the sound design is really good. It's just one of my all-time favorites. So I gotta have Inside Out on there.
I've loved this movie since I saw the first teaser trailer where you see inside the thoughts of the parents, and the father's like, "Oh God, what did she say? I don't know, I didn't catch it. What does she want?" And the mom is like, "Signal the father," and he doesn't get it. It's like so brilliant. This movie is just, it's near perfection in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's so funny, and all the voice casting was just pitch perfect. I can't imagine anybody else playing angry than Lucas Black. I can't imagine anybody else playing sadness but Phyllis from The Office. I don't know. It's just the best. I just love it. Even things like broccoli on pizza. San Francisco, you have to ruin pizza.
First Hawaii, now you.
Yeah, now you. I loved Inside Out. So. So Mike, what is your number 4?
Well, just a few thoughts on Inside Out there. Well, firstly, actually, just a humorous thing. In Japan, the whole thing about broccoli being gross to kids isn't really a thing, so they had to replace it with some other vegetable for the joke to translate. And I've no idea whether they had to do that for the broccoli on the pizza joke. So that's a funny thing.
Yeah.
But your point on the perfect cast, that's interesting, because that's one of the things Pixar has always done brilliantly, and it's not as obvious. Sometimes they cast famous people, sometimes they cast non-famous people. Like they've sometimes used one of their own if the scratch track is jack good. Joe Rampete's played a fair few characters in their films: Lenny, Wheezy, Heimlich, and A Bug's Life, and so on. So no one's going to know him as an actor, But obviously, in this film, it's brilliant because, Amy Palmer, she doesn't just do a great Joy, she does a very particular kind of bossy bordering on arrogant joy, and how
Hmm.
arrogant she has been in trying to be joyful and all that. But
Right.
it really is a fantastic film.
Yeah, I'm so excited for Soul. I mean, all you have to
Oh,
really tell me is that it's Pete Docter, and I'm in
hmm.
for that because I just
He does the most, the Pixar films that sort of wear their heart on the sleeve the most. Like,
uh
Up and Monsters Inc. both have sequences of, where the waterfalls flow,
right.
and
Yeah.
so does this one.
Yep. Very. I agree. I really do.
Anyway, so my number four, sorry if this is going to be a bit boring, but it's already popped up on this list. It's Spider-Man Into the
Mhm.
Spider-Verse.
Yeah. I thought that might make other people's lists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was the one I was thinking of when I said objectively it might be higher than number four, just because it does so many things phenomenally. Like the amount of industry people that said this is a phenomenal game-changing film when it came out was unreal. Like people that would never, comment on animated films otherwise. But
Mhm.
I think there are three things that make it as brilliant as it is. First off, well, I mean, there's the visual style. Obviously, CG animation so needs to be more creative, and this does it. Like from the way it uses the sort of printing texture of comic books at points to the language of speech bubbles. Obviously, it's not a comic book; it's an animated film. So even when people say, "Oh, it's just like a comic book," it obviously isn't. What they mean is that it's capturing the same experience like the old Spider-Man films, but this is doing it in the classic sort of knowing wink wink way. Secondly, of course, there's the fact that it actually is, really funny. I mean, so often animated films, uh, even the comedies, aren't funny
Yeah.
to an adult audience. Well, unless you just find pop culture references inherently funny, which more people don't these days. So that's good. But this one really is on that front, so that's brilliant. And then the third thing, obviously, is Miles himself. The tricky thing these days is that lots of films, and Disney especially, I know this isn't a Disney film, I'm just mentioning that, have a tendency to sort of be, try and be prolific in being diverse in terms of, having, people of different genders, of different races, and whatever. But more often than not, I'm inclined to be a bit pissed off about it because so often it seems like it's just coming from a place of them wanting to be seen to be doing a good thing rather than an inherently honest place,
Right.
like it's basically it's like trying to be PC because people will like you for it in a sense. But this is a film where they have a African American person. He comes from a very specific background, a not very economically well one, but he's been sent to an uptown boarding school in New York somewhere, the Bronx. I have no idea, but
Yeah.
so that's a very specific background on the other hand. But it comes from a very suitably honest place, and the way at the end of the film they have the message, basically that anyone can be behind the mask. It's honest, it's believable. I mean, Sony is a corporation, obviously, but there isn't a bone of cynicism in this film's body, so that really makes it wonderful.
Yeah.
Uh,
The whole scene where his dad is talking to him through the door, like that is so, I don't know, great.
yeah,
Like it is emotionally true. It's so well done.
yeah, it's so easy to imagine this film, once it introduces all those other spider people, for the uncle and the dad to, stop being a pivotal part of the film, but they keep on being a pivotal part in the right place. It
Yeah.
balances its characters so well. I mean, obviously the Spider Noir, Spider Ham, and Penny Parker, they're all minor characters. They don't have journeys or whatever, but they fulfill their purpose well. That's something animated films often suck at, but using characters in small ways well. Often they're
Yeah.
just there to be there. But no, this really is a phenomenal film in just so many ways, and it's. I really hope it leads to being a game changer for so many studios going forward.
Me too. I agree.
It definitely the
Yeah.
best superhero film of the decade. I dare anyone to say otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I did really love Wonder Woman, but that was more on an emotional basis more than necessarily the story. But that I just connected with it emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, yeah, it's certainly up there. That's for sure. Um, yeah. uh, so Ryan, what do you have at number 4?
My number 4, we're going with another dark horse. I'm talking about Rango from
Oh.
2011. Uh,
Oh,
are you surprised?
I am
uh,
surprised, but yeah.
no, only surprised in the sense that I didn't necessarily expect it to pop up on the list.
Well, I've always loved this movie. I grew up watching John Wayne westerns and Clint Eastwood westerns with my dad, and Rango just feels like like a bit of an offshoot of that. Just full frontal, I am not a humongous fan of Johnny Depp as an actor. I think that he has fallen into the typecasting of the weird guy who always has to wear face paint and do and act really strange. Like he basically has played Jack Sparrow for about 10 years, like Lone Ranger, etc. But
Yeah.
Rango is one of his very best performances. He plays this lizard who originally starts out as kind of a loser, but a winner in his own mind. But then he encounters the town of Dirt, and he basically has to put on a whole smoke and mirrors routine. But he eventually becomes beloved by the town, and he has to come across Rattlesnake Jake, who I have been deathly afraid of snakes my entire life, and Rattlesnake Jake just haunted my nightmares for a little while, voiced brilliantly by Bill Nye. Uh, this movie is another underrated one because I have to remind myself that it is animation because everything just flows so seamlessly together. And it's got great action again, specifically the scene where Rango and the town get the water jug back and they have to gun it through the canyon while being chased by all of the hillbilly, I want to say, rats on those wing things, and they're being chased by the song of Flight of the Valkyries, but it's done with banjos and trumpets. It's both hilarious and kind of gripping all at the same time. So to put the period at the end of the sentence there, Rango doesn't get enough love, and especially because I think it's from Nickelodeon. But on the whole, Rango is just really good, and I've always loved it. I was actually watching it last night in preparation for this list. So,
Mm-hmm. Well, I might just say, I mean, Nickelodeon Films did release it, but I'm pretty sure they had almost no role in the production of this film. So there's that.
Is it
You mentioned the
Paramount?
good point.
yeah, it is Paramount. You mentioned the realism. I don't know if you're aware of this, but that film was animated by ILM, as in the George Lucas Special Effects House. So
I was not aware of that, and I'm grateful to you for that. So thank you.
so that might explain to you some of the approaches to its visual effects. Like they're not animating it in a special effects way, but neither is it the usual sort of cartoony Pixar-esque style either. It has a more realistic sensibility. I think one of the reasons it is underrated is that it's a ridiculously personal film. Like Gore Verbinski just wanted to make a Western as much as he could, and fair play to the executives from letting him do that for, what was it, $130 million, something like that. But it's such a personal, idiosyncratic film, like it appeals to his taste so much. And often when filmmakers do that, the results at the box office can be shaky. This one did all right, given that, So it is mostly those people who, like yourself, adore westerns to no end. It sticks with them, and to most others, they do like it if they, are willing to shake the whole animation is for kids mentality off of them. Actually, I remember there were people arguing about smoking being a bad image in it for kids or whatever.
Really? Smoking?
I have to admit, I'm not a huge fan of this movie, but I can see why you
Really?
have it on your list. Yeah, I just feel like it takes a long time for the story to get going, and a lot of it is kind of Rango kind of ambling about. Like, I don't know, like a lot of that kind of stuff doesn't really work for me. I guess the humor it's a little too, it's just not my style. And once they finally get looking for the water and they get on their purpose of the story, then I think it gets a lot better. But I feel like the first 30 minutes are kind of just Rango ambling about, talking, and I don't know. It's just not it's just not my favorite, but I totally see why you like it, and it's definitely unique. And it did win an Oscar, and one of the few non Disney / Pixar winners in the last decade for best animated feature. So it's kind of unique that way. And it was sort of a weird year, 2011, for animation without a Disney. They had the 2 independent films that year. They had Kung Fu Panda, Kung Fu Panda
Puss in
2.
Boots.
Yeah, and Puss in Boots. So it was sort of a weird year for animation. So I can see why it's your favorite. It's just not a favorite of mine. But I am not somebody who knows a lot about Westerns. So I think
Also, before we move on, shout out to Timothy Oliphant for doing an awesome job as the Spirit of the West.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has great voice cast. There's no doubt about that, for sure. So very interesting choice. All right. Well, my number 3 is one of my favorite Disney films, and it's Tangled is my number 3 choice.
That was a very difficult cut. Like,
yeah.
Like that would have been like number 7 or 8, because I like this movie better than Frozen. Like if we're being honest.
Yeah.
So do I.
I do as well. I mean, I love Frozen. I'm not a Frozen hater by any stretch of the imagination, but
Oh no, me neither.
I loved Tangled. It actually kind of won me back to Disney, because at the time that Tangled came out, I was not like reviewing movies or like into movies. I still liked movies, but I was not where I am now. And I had gone to see Princess and the Frog, before that, and the years before that, and I was very disappointed at the time. Now I kind of appreciate it more than I did then, but at the time I was very disappointed in Princess and the Frog. I just thought the story wasn't very good, and I don't know, it wasn't what I wanted it to be. And so I kind of went, and there'd been so long since a Walt Disney Animation Studio film had come out that I had liked. There'd been Pixar, but it had been since Emperor's New Groove, really, that at the time, that one that I had liked. And so I went into it kind of skeptical. The trailers hadn't been very good, but I think I took my younger siblings, and I was blown away by it. And I think it's really it's Disney's first true romantic comedy. That it's one of the only of the princess movies that has a lot of time with the 2 leads, with a lot of witty dialogue between the 2. I mean, because most of the time it's done through montages, or it's not as witty as it's done in here. And I just love all of that, and I love Mother Gothel. I think she's such a great villain, and the idea of using motherhood to manipulate and control, and it's such a wicked concept. And it's been so long since we've had a truly wicked villain in a Disney movie that I think I appreciate it even more now than I did then. We keep getting all these surprise villains from Disney and Pixar, and so I just I love everything about it. I love her personality and how she's very indecisive, and I'm a terrible daughter. This is the best day of my life. Like, I love all that. I love Maximus. I love Pascal. I love, I love Flynn Rider as a character. He's such a good, well-written male character. Zachary Levi does such a great job with the voice performance.
Voiced by a pre-Shazam Zachary.
Yeah, pre-Shazam. And I mean, a lot of people are a little hard on the music, but I think it's delightful, perfectly fun, cute music. And the lantern scene blew me away, and I still love it. So I don't know. I just think it's a great movie. So I have it at 3.
My favorite song in Tangled is Now That I See You. I've listened to that song about 100 times, and I don't think I ever will stop. Like,
wait, are you talking about the Lantern song?
Yeah, the Lantern song.
Yeah. That song's name is "I See the Light."
Yeah.
Oh, I see the light. Yes, you are right.
But yeah, it's a really beautiful sequence, and I think a sweet little Alan Menken song, and yeah, I just really enjoyed it. I don't know, where are you on Tangled, Mike?
No. I'd agree with most of what you said. Personally, I find the I See Your the Lights On. I find the song a little generic. A little generic. Like if I was just listening to it, I'd probably be like, "Yeah, that was okay, I guess." But
Uh-huh.
the visuals absolutely sell the sequence. It was one of the real. This is what CG can do that traditional animation can't. Showcases with all the glowing lanterns and everything. That was
Mhm.
phenomenal. Again, a lot of the comedy, as you've mentioned, really works. It despite the trailers making it out to be some sort of Shrek wannabe, the humor really wasn't like that at all. It was great.
Yeah.
Uh, I would say again that I don't think the music. I think the music is generally very good, if not exceptional. I think Moana's slate of songs is. I prefer that one slightly, but I will say I think Tangled is the better film of the two. And
Hmm.
again, Mother Gothel is such a wonderful villain because it's psychologically scary the degree to which she's manipulative. She doesn't just do it to win; she does it because she enjoys it. It's uh, that's the thing I like in my animated films when they have darkness sort of lingering around the edges, things like that, things that even if they don't scare you as a kid, you're very much aware of them as an adult and they give them edge. It is sort of a disappointment that, because our whole deception is based entirely on lies, once that starts unwinding, she's far less credible as a threat. But, what are you going to do?
Hmm.
Sometimes that's just what happens.
Yeah, and I love Donna Murphy's performance as Mother Gothel. I think she really sells it.
Yeah, I think she is the best song, personally.
Oh yeah,
Mother
for
Knows
sure.
Best. Yes,
Yeah,
that song is awesome.
so good. So, Mike, what's your number three?
Well, you don't have to worry about forgetting what the third film that year was, because this is it: How to Train Your Dragon.
Ah,
Oh,
that's
Yeah,
right.
great pick. Great pick.
I had a lot of internal debate about this spot. It was basically a four-way tie between all three Dragon films and Kung Fu Panda 2. But this is my DreamWorks spot, obviously.
Uh-huh.
So eventually I decided to be objective enough and admit that as much as I love Kung Fu Panda 2, the dragons are, from a filmmaking perspective, the better films. And from there, I was just deciding which one has stuck with me the best. And I think it's the first one.
Same with me.
Yeah,
I
it's
agree.
such an interesting thing. In many ways, the dragon films they're about. I mean, lots of films are about growing up, but they're specifically about different phases. Like the first one is about being in your teens, and I was 15 when I saw it. Then the second one is being about in your early 20s. I was 19 when I saw that one, and then the last one is about inching towards your 30s. I'm 25 now, so they map onto my life in a somewhat unnerving manner. It's freaky, but
Mhm.
just on this first film, Chris Sanders and Dean Dubois, they done Lilo and Stitch, and then they did this film, and they brought a lot of what made that film work to this one, but it was very unique and different in its own right. And just, I mean, firstly, the visuals, the texture, it feels very visually distinct from all the films that came before. This was an era where computer animators started, doing their films like live action films. Like they had the Coen brothers cinematographer as a consultant on this one. Uh, Roger Deakins, yes, that's his name. So you really notice that in the way they use lighting and camera and everything. Obviously, Toothless is just he may very well be the best animated character of the 2010s. I'm not kidding there.
Mhm.
In his various cat influenced and in the sequels more dog influenced behaviors. And I'm not even a cat person, but it works that phenomenally well. Hiccup's journey is perfectly realized. The dragon designs are so unique. Like you've got different dragons in that film, and only one of them is a sort of typical Western dragon. That be the monstrous nightmare. The others are all unique and off kilter and quirky, but brilliant in their own way. I just don't have enough good words from that film. The closest thing it has to a flaw is that his Hiccup sidekicks aren't that compelling, but they do work for their sequences, so they're still fine, and they're not they don't become nearly as much of a problem as they do in the sequels, unfortunately. Not Astrid, she's fine. I'm talking about the other four.
Mhm.
My favorite of
So
that whole supporting team was Astrid, but the rest I've just never been big fans of. They were just annoying to me.
Yeah. Well, as I say, they're fine in the first film, but they're nowhere near the strength of the rest. And then in the sequels, they're actively a liability. Like
Mhm.
whoever came up with that subplot of Snotlout hitting on Hiccup's mom in the third film should be fired.
Oh yeah, I really like How to Train Your Dragon 3, but yes, that
Yeah.
plot was horrible.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, in the third one, the Kristen Wiig character,
Oh,
ooh,
Roughnut.
I thought she was very annoying. That just I don't know. I didn't like her, but the first one I agreed is my favorite of the three, and I absolutely love the flying sequences in all of these movies. I think I could just watch Hiccup and Toothless flying for a whole movie. I think I
Yeah.
love
Oh,
those sequences.
yeah. It's funny in the sequels, the film they never really went for that sort of blissful type of flying
Yeah.
emotions that they went for in the first one, like that romantic flight sequence where there's no dialogue. Uh, Up to that point, Astrid hasn't been that pivotal a character, but that's such a you know a gorgeous sequence with lovely violin and string instruments and what have you, that alone makes it the best romance DreamWorks has ever done. Apologies to all the Shrek and Fiona lovers out there.
Yeah, yeah. The only nitpick I have with this franchise is I am not crazy about the voice casting. I've never loved Jay Baruchel as Hiccup. Just I don't know, it just doesn't quite fit for me, and I don't know. And then I also just think it's a little bit weird because they have like why does he not have the same accent as his father? And like the other people in the village, like that's a little bit weird. It just seems like it's kind of a hodgepodge of random voices, um, and so that's my only nitpick. But I really like How to Train Your Dragon. I think it's a very good movie. It's a classic formula that we've seen many times, with the child coming into contact with an alien, a dragon, uh, a robot, a fantastical creature, that kind of a thing. And it almost
ET
always
basically.
works. Yeah, it almost always works for me. It's just such an easy way to bring heart. And
Yeah, it's
uh,
such a familiar story, but it makes it work as well as the most clever thriller, you know.
yeah, yep, I agree. It's a very good pick. Very good pick. All right.
Seamless phone home.
Yeah, right. Ryan, what do you have at number 3?
Well, I think for the first time, our lists are all similar in one respect. My number 3 is Inside Out, which we have all talked about, but I'll try and keep my thoughts on it, like on stuff that hasn't been brought up.
Uh-huh.
Uh, this, I think that up until that point, it was the best looking Pixar movie. You can track how good the animation got from the first Toy Story up to then, and that was like the zenith. It would eventually get better with Toy Story 4, but that was the best animated one that I had seen up until that point. But like you mentioned, Rachel, the voice casting is absolutely perfect. I mean, Lewis Black is pretty much anger in human form, and he's made so much money off of basically complaining, like on a stage for
Yeah.
an hour, and he was absolutely perfect in that regard. But I think what I love about this movie the most is how relatable it is. Like, despite the fact that I've I've never really well I've never been a girl. I felt a lot of the feelings that Riley felt, and in that regard, it was very relatable, at least to me, because it's
Sure.
just all a matter of growing up, and you experience new emotions when you're growing up. That's just how this stuff works. And out of out of any Pixar movie, I think it dealt with the whole relatability factor the most. You can argue like the first scene in Up, where you see Carl and Ellie's relationship from the beginning to the end, like in terms of relatability, but Inside Out is definitely the most relatable Pixar movie that they've ever done.
Well,
Yeah.
that's I suppose that in many ways that's the best sign of a good film. So many films these days, or well, especially these days, they say that a film for everybody, but a film for everybody is really for nobody. A film is often best when from an emotional and thematic perspective, it's a very specific experience. Like take Finding Nemo, from a thematic perspective, you could argue that film is only aimed at fathers, especially overprotective fathers, and yet it was their highest grossing film at the time. For a long time, it was probably definitely one of the consensus picks for their top films, even though theoretically I shouldn't be able to engage with it at all. But there you go. And Inside Out, it's exactly the same. Like, I haven't moved. I was never an 11-year-old girl, but we have all grown up and gone through turbulent emotions enough for us to get it. And when you delve into a very specific experience, you're using a very specific thing to make but in a way that the themes are universal. That's powerful filmmaking,
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
a really good point. And what a great gift to parents to be able to have these concepts, to be able to talk to your child about the importance of the sad times of life and how they help make us a full person. And like, oh my gosh, what a wonderful just jumping off point for discussion with your kids. I think it could be I don't know, it's just such a brilliant film in that regard too. So very good choice. I agree. um, well, so my number 2 is probably a unique one to me, but is a movie that meant a lot to me, is Tom Moore's film Song of the Sea. And this came out about 2 months after my cousin had passed away. She had 2 little boys, and her little boy spoke at her funeral about how he just didn't understand why this had happened. And it was obviously very traumatic and very tragic. And so when I went to see the movie Song of the Sea, and it's about this little boy who's lost his mother, it really hit home personally to me. And he gets a chance to say goodbye to his mother. And it was just so devastating. And I saw the movie, and I just stayed in my seat for about 10 minutes while they were cleaning up the theater and everything, because I was just so overwhelmed by what I had seen. And I think the movie is so stunning in every other way. So it's not just the emotion, but the incredible lore, the beautiful animation, the beautiful music. I love just little details, like even how it portrays Halloween and the trick-or-treaters and the owls, and the whole mythology behind the old woman who is bottling up the trying to stop people from feeling, because she was so devastated by what happened with her son, and so she thinks she's doing something good, but really she's obviously not, and that people need to be allowed to be sad and go through these things, and so she's an interesting character and also a villain and scary at times. The whole relationship between Saoirse and Ben as they go on this little road trip is so great. Their father, as he's just sort of stuck and grieving, I think is a really easy character to relate to. I just love this movie, and I got a chance to interview Tom Moore, and I just think he's an amazing director, amazing animator, and so I have it number 2.
Wow, you got to interview the director. Now I'm jealous.
And it was an incredible experience. Of course, years later, it was just last year that I got to interview him, but I actually cried on my review on my YouTube channel, and he remembered my review, and that they kind of passed it around the office and people had watched it. So that made me feel really good. But I don't know. I love Song of the Sea. I think it is just such a beautiful, dare I say it, masterpiece. But Mike, this comes from your neck of the woods. What do you think of Song of the Sea?
I'm so apologetic that this film did not make the cut. I swear it was very close. It honestly was.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Irish
No,
people.
it's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Like, even when you were discussing it there, I was having second thoughts about should it? I don't know. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that it hit me that emotionally, but certainly the reason why it's probably a better film than Secret of Kells, which is still a pretty fantastic film in its own right, is that it feels more of an emotional place. In many ways, it's interesting. I saw the film twice, and the second time I saw it with my parents, and they both had comments along the lines of the visuals were the best bit. That was what kept me interested. Not in a necessarily a condescending way, but I definitely get the impression that otherwise they found the story not as engaging. But so, well, okay, whatever. But
Yeah.
but even so, it's also an interesting perspective because a lot of the mythology in this film, like I'm not uber familiar with it, but I know it vaguely. So I still often wonder how does your average American perceive a film like this? But and I think of it in the same way I think of Spirited Away. That's a film that is very rooted in Shinoto. I have no idea what the Japanese religion or whatever it is that it has that a lot of beliefs and principles are present, and obviously, but they have to present it in a way that makes sense to natural audiences. And like when I'm watching Spirited Away, I'm not like super aware. There's things I'm not getting here, but I do know on a factual level this probably still plays a little better for a Japanese viewer, maybe. So I think with this film, does the same hold true for an American viewer. I mean, you've just said that it's all the emotional stuff of the characters that really makes you weep and gets it for you, which is great, obviously. But so I still wonder about the mythology. I mean, obviously, it's still wonderfully great fantasy in its own right. A Selkie, basically a sea werewolf or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it really is just a beautifully unique in every aspect film. And it's an easy thing to say, oh, a film is very Ghibli-like because it has such a beautiful visuals and such a sweet-natured soul. But of all the films you could say this about, I think this one is the closest in that regard.
And he was very influenced by
yeah.
Ghibli.
Well, everyone is. I mean, who wouldn't be?
That's true.
I'm also a bit envious that, like, I live in Ireland, yet you're the one who's gotten to. Okay, you didn't meet him, but you did interview him. So
I know it's a weird world, isn't it?
Like, I have the art of books. I've read articles in the paper about it. Like, for instance, did you know there's a vegan store near Carton Saloon that does very well because a lot of the employees there are vegan? True story.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah.
It's one of the few animation studios in Ireland that isn't based in Dublin. It's in Kilkenny, it's not a hugely sparsely populated county, but it's not a big one either. It's sort of middle of the road. So it's interesting that the most well-known animation studio is not based in the city. Like all the big animation studios in the US, they're in LA, aren't they?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
But anyway, there you go.
True. You seen this one, Ryan? Have you seen Song of the Sea?
I saw it when it came out originally, but it has been a while. However, I do remember really enjoying it. I remember it was one of those movies where I was like, you could write like 10 academic papers on what this movie is trying to say, and they could all be right.
Yeah.
But I do legitimately really enjoy this movie. It just narrowly missed my list. Like, again, it's like if it were top 15, it'd be like 7 or 8. But but the movie is excellent. Very unique animation, like you said, and it's just it felt kind of like how Studio Ghibli does things.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like an American animated movie. Not to dump on American movies, they are awesome, but Song of the Sea just felt like it felt different, and that's what I like the most about it.
Yeah, I think if it had been an American film, there would have been like a quirky sidekick and these kind
none
of
of that
things.
in this.
No. And so so Mike, what do you have at number 2?
Oh, sorry, is it my turn? Just on Song of the Sea, it is an interesting case though, because like almost everyone who has seen the film does love it. Very unusually for a film where the visual style is for most people the best thing about it. It has a very high rating on IMDb for those sorts of films. Like I think it was an 8 last I checked. So, for the most part, everyone who has watched it has loved it. So it's just a thing of getting more people to see it.
Yep.
But a fair amount of people have seen it, more than the box office numbers would certainly suggest. So there is justice in a sense.
Because it was I don't know if it's still available, but it was on Amazon, available to watch on Amazon Prime for a long time. And so a lot of people watched it. I had a number of friends who came to me and said, oh, my kids and I, we watched it, because everyone knows how much I love this movie, and that they watched it on Amazon Prime. So I think that helped kind of get the word out. So is it, did I skip? It's right. It's your turn.
No,
right,
I didn't get onto it properly. So a bit boring. My number 2 is Inside Out.
Oh, yay! So we all have it.
Yeah, this was such a close race between this and Toy Story 3. I think the thing that eventually decided it for me was Toy Story 3's finale. The last 20 minutes is a masterpiece, but that is slightly better than the rest, whereas Inside Out, it has its quality for the most part the whole way through.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying that the rest of Toy Story 3, the first 70 minutes, isn't great, but it is. But, you know, the reason people remember that film is because of the third act.
Yeah. You're splitting, a certain degree, a list like this, you have to split hairs a little bit. So I understand.
Like, since it's been discussed twice, unlike with Spider-Verse, where I could add things, I don't know. I'm trying to reach for things to add to this film on this point. I mean, because I already chipped in previously as the thing.
Yeah.
I suppose.
Very good.
I suppose one thing that does leap to mind. Well, we all mentioned the Bing Bong scene earlier. Well, you know, the scene where he's forgotten. That's one of the most tear-jerking scenes in its own right. And especially, it's an interesting thing because when you think about it, does Riley just forget about it, or do Joy and the other emotions forget about him too? You know, that makes it even more, oh my God, what just happened thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love the whole visual design. Like I said, I love the globes. I think I love the sound of them. I love the look of them. I think they have such a tactile feel to them. And
actually, that's a good point. Another thing the film does phenomenally well is it's got so many, you know, abstract rules and concepts. When you have an animated film that, you know, does an alternate world, it's very high concept. It's very important to introduce it in a way that doesn't feel exposition-y, and this one's a masterclass, all because of the use of color. Like, we're able to quickly see that, you know, a yellow ball, that means a happy memory, and then all the other different colors mean their emotions. So there's so many aspects like that through a mixture of visuals and exposition that isn't really delivered as exposition, we're able to pick up the rules of this world, and it never feels like we're being lectured or talked down to. So that's another thing the world does phenomenally.
Yeah, and so when Bing Bong is in the pit with all those sort of they almost look like the expired bulbs, almost look like a firework that had kind of gone out, you know. They have that charcoaly kind of look about them, and it's really effective. It's really good.
You know, I remember that Richard Kind agreed to not take place in the publicity of the film because they were keeping Bing Bong as sort of the film's secret weapon, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Perfect voice too.
That can't have been easy.
Yeah. Well, very good.
It wasn't his first.
Yeah.
It wasn't his first time in a Pixar film. He's another one that's appeared a few times. He voiced a minor Van in Cars, but prior to that, he voiced Molt in A Bug's Life. Who's a pretty fun character in his own right, but obviously Bing Bong is far and away takes the cake.
Yeah. Very, very, very good. All right. Ryan, what do you have at number 2?
Well, we're on common ground again. My number 2 is Into the Spider-Verse. So we all share Inside Out, and we all share Into the Spider-Verse. If my score is right here at home.
Yeah.
You're correct.
Yeah.
So again, since we talked about this one twice, I'll try and keep this relatively brief and only talk about stuff that hasn't happened yet. But originally I was like, this was really, really good. I didn't think it was amazing, like 99% of the population. But I was like, I thought this was really, really good. And then the more I thought about it, it just got better and better and better and better. And it's just the movie is excellent. It's near perfection for me. I think what I like the most about it, though, is how this Spider-Man movie could not have taken place at literally any other decade, because the original Spider-Man movies, directed by Sam Raimi, were basically made to show that comic book movies could be taken seriously and they weren't just all about Joel Schumacher and all the whole Batman stuff. The Amazing Spider-Man was trying to do darker and more gritty, and it didn't work. And the MCU Spider-Man stuff was trying to bring Spider-Man back into relevancy in the MCU. But Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse felt like the only true Spider-Man movie, because it wasn't trying to set up a cinematic universe. It wasn't trying to be anything grander than anything it was. It captured the spirit of what makes Spider-Man so awesome in the comics, and basically did a did a did an alternate universe story about as good as you could probably get. It's better than a lot of the other ones I've seen. And my favorite scene in the whole movie is the one that I believe Mike mentioned earlier, was the scene between Miles's father and Miles, when Miles is tied to the chair, and his dad is like, "Well, when you get ready to talk, I'm always there." And I'm like, that is just so effective in so many ways. And really, that's all I have to say about
I'd
that.
love to take credit for that, but I can't. Rachel mentioned that one.
Oh, Rachel did. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. But yeah, no, it's such a great movie. It really is. And it's one you could watch, I think, over and over again and get something new and different out of it every time you watch it. It's a really rich movie in that way. Very good. All right.
It's interesting, Ryan. You mentioned the angle of being, you thought you weren't blown away the first time you saw it. The first time I saw it, and it's reflected in my original review, I was like, this is a near masterpiece. I sort of had this tone of not committing to saying it was a masterpiece yet, because so often you say a film is, and then you watch it a second time and you're like, oh, it doesn't hold up. So I was being too cautious about it, but then I saw it a second time. I was like, no, this really does hold up.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
so I had a not unsimilar sentiment.
Well, the ending battle sequence between all of the spider people, I guess is the right way to say it, all the spider people and Kingpin's goons, the whole sequence there, the animation was a little too dizzying for my like. It was like, at a point I was like, movie, please stop. I got to get off for a few minutes, because there was so much happening, so much was flying by. It kind of reminded me of that Ralph Bakshi movie, Cool World. I don't know if you all have heard of it. It's a really terrible movie, but it's animated, and there was just a bunch of animated stuff just flying around there, and I'm not saying that Into the Spider-Verse is on the same vein as Cool World. Far from it. That analogy got a little away from me. But my point is, my original problem with Into the Spider-Verse was the animation got a little too stylized for my liking, that it got a little blinding. But now that I've actually gotten a chance to see it a couple more times, the animation style does fit with the tone that they're going for, so I can excuse it.
Yeah.
Did that work better for you when you saw it on home media? Because, since it's not as big a screen, the dizzying moments weren't as dizzying because they weren't filling your whole vision,
Surprisingly enough, it did.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Not surprisingly, that's what I'd expect.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, all right. So now we're at the number one spot. It's pretty exciting, and mine will not be a surprise to most anybody that follows me and knows me. My number one is Makoto Shinkai's masterpiece, Your Name. I
called it.
Yeah. I love this movie. I just think it's got everything that you could want in a film. I think it's really funny. It sort of starts you out on this sort of Freaky Friday type story. These two teens that end up sharing bodies and switching places, and they don't know each other at all, and so they're trying to figure out each other's lives. And I just love, like, when I don't know, just little things like how excited how excited the girls to Mitsuha is to going to cafes and experiencing life in the city, and just so I love that first part, but then I love that how it eases you into this deeper themes, and it becomes something different. And I love the whole message of the movie about once you understand somebody's humanity, how it changes you as a person, and you will do anything to rescue and to help that person that you've come to understand, and the value of each individual soul. And when the oh my gosh, what's wrong with me, but just the desperation that that they all feel to try to help save Mitsuha and the village, and just every step of the way, I just absolutely love it. I love the animation is so beautiful. I absolutely love the music. I love that sense of, so Taki sees her on the subway, and he senses that they have this connection, and then it just can never leave him, and he feels that on a spiritual level that he has to find this person that he had seen, and because they have that connection through the band that literally binds them, and having been in each other's bodies, and there's this sense of sort of spirituality about the movie that I really connect with and that I love. But I just think it has everything you could want in a movie. It's funny, it's dramatic, it's romantic. I love the ending. I think it's pitch perfect. It's exciting. It's just, I just think it's great. I absolutely love it. And so far, very few people have disliked it that I've recommended it to. Almost everybody has enjoyed it. So I just think it's an incredible film. What did you think of Your Name?
I really enjoyed it, and it was, again, a very narrow cut. If it was like this would be like number 6. Like, I thought the movie was outstanding, but I just in terms of rewatchability, like the movies on my list, I've watched a lot more than that one. I should go back and watch Your Name again, because I haven't seen it in like 2 years.
Yeah, I can understand that. The music, I think that the dub is pretty good, but I think the one downside to the dub is I think the music in English isn't as good, because it feels like they have to rush it compared to
wait
Japanese.
Did they change the score, or are you just talking about the songs?
The songs.
Oh,
yeah,
right.
I prefer them in Japanese over the English personally. But
well, the interesting thing is, I've only actually seen this film once. I got to see it in IMAX. Actually, let me tell you, it's such a weird experience. It's such a weird experience seeing a subtitled film in IMAX. That's the only time it's happened. In a sense, I think maybe the reason I haven't watched it since is I'm somewhat timid that the next time I see it, just on my computer or television or whatever, it's not going to live up to that experience. So, so there's a bit of that. But I really obviously should watch it again because it's phenomenal. You've actually reminded me that Weathering with You, it's getting screened here in January in just a couple of weeks, so I must see that.
It's coming to my local theater as a Fathom event, so I'm definitely going to check that out.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I have seen it, and it's beautiful. it's not Your Name, but
I would say I would say on Your Name, like, though I do love it, and don't question me, I do love it. Like, I don't necessarily. Sometimes I do find it to be just the wee minutest bit overrated. Please don't shoot me.
That's a hot take.
No,
hot take on this show.
It's not a hot take. This is still a 9 out of 10 film. Okay. So all I mean is, I think some of the plot shifts it takes in the back half, they're very anime-esque, and it's not necessarily that I don't have a problem with those. It just sort of feels like up to that point it was being such a great character piece, and then the filmmakers thought, this is an anime, we have to have that in. As I say, it's been so long since I've seen it that maybe these are just muddled thoughts, and maybe this won't hold true once I watch the film again.
Yeah.
But that does sort of settle into my opinion of the film
Mhm.
a bit right now. As I say, you know, maybe if I come back after seeing it in a month's time, that fact won't hold true. So that's just
Yeah,
as it is right now.
I can understand
Just
that.
just one other just one other aside. It's very funny watching. I think that was the first time as I say, seen a subtitled Japanese film in cinemas. I'd seen other subtitle films, but you know the sequence when I'm sorry, I can't remember the characters' names, but
Uh-huh.
when the girl is in the boy's body and she's at their school, she's using the wrong pronouns, and the others are looking at her weirdly. The way, because Japanese pronouns, you know, the way you refer to yourself, there's so many different ways of saying I.
Right.
If I hadn't seen enough anime to sort of know what they were getting at, because the subtitles basically uh, they had to keep saying I and then having in brackets what it means. So it could be a bit immersion breaking if you're not used to that sort of thing. But again, since there's no English equivalent, you just kind of have to do that for people to understand it.
Yeah. I mean,
Like
and
it,
I've heard that about people that prefer the sort of the earlier parts of the movie, where the way I look at it, and I think it's totally valid, but the way I look at it is sort of the movie's just kind of warming you up, like it just starts being this
Mhm.
light kind of lark, and then it kind of gets you more and more and more and more and more invested so that you're ready for this. And so that's how I kind of see it, but I can understand that point of view. And it's one that I connected with on a real sort of spiritual meta level kind of, and so I can understand it if you don't have that kind of spiritual connection, uh, where you really feel that desperation on the part of Taki, and so then the ending when they find each other again, it's so, to me it's just so good. But I can understand it being, you admire it, you like it, but not being one of your, you know, top 5 of the decade. That's not a problem. um, and but it is an interesting movie that I still have yet to find somebody who like hated it. It's just so far everybody that I've recommended it to has liked it on some level, because it's just so beautiful.
Yeah.
The music is so great, and it just builds and builds and builds and has it. I just feel like it kind of has something for everyone, because it does have the funny parts, it does have the exciting parts, it does have the romance, it does have you know, kind of everything that you could want in a movie. And so yeah, it's
Oh,
it's my favorite.
uh, absolutely. It really is a phenomenal crowd freezer. Like it's got something
Yeah,
for everyone. It's got young adult romance that actually, you know, is good and not, you
yeah,
know, pretty insipid if you're not a teenager. Uh, even so, the fantasy, I still do find it works, you know, in its sort of slightly wacky way.
yeah,
All the timeline stuff, the cosmic grandeur, and you know, it doesn't hurt that it's phenomenally, stupidly beautiful to look at either.
yeah. And it's a good entryway if you have people that just are like, I don't like anime, I won't see anime. I think it's a really good gateway to uh to introducing people to anime.
Yeah, yeah, I suppose that's the thing. If people, it is possible to get someone to like anime if you can just sort of quality control it and make sure they only see the good stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that against anime people, but a lot of the anime that, you know, anime people watch is only really aimed at anime people, and you know, it's the sort of stuff that there's something I remember very vividly. You know, Shinji Miyazaki's, sorry, Hayao
Yeah.
Miyazaki, sorry. Uh, of Ghibli fame, in an interview he did with Roger Ebert, I think he said words to the effect of, "I could probably not recommend most anime to you because most of the stuff is very either, you know, sexual or violently graphic for the sake of it, and if it's on television, it's far too budget conscious to do anything unique. That the kind of films he were doing at the time were really, you know, like an oasis in a desert in terms of that quality that would win over anybody."
Hmm. Well, and also even the Studio Ghibli films, I think that there's kind of a level of sort of fantasy and a little bit of that a little bit of uh magical realism, depending on the movie, that can be challenging for people on a first watch, you know what I mean? Whereas this, it's like a little, I mean, it does have those, I guess it does have its own sort of brand of fantasy, but it's like set, you have characters go to high school and they're working at a job. Like it's a little more, I feel like a little more easy to connect with than maybe some other anime.
A little more grounded.
Start. Yeah. So I think it's a good first start. But anyway, Mike, what is your number one?
Okay, well, I mean, this is likely to be, I'm not controversial per se, but like you could argue on some objective level that this is actually the weakest of the five, rather than being the strongest. So a bit like you with your name, this film's in number one purely for personal reasons. Wreck-It Ralph.
Okay.
Wow,
Yeah.
I would have never picked Wreck-It Ralph.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
What is it you love about?
It's hard to say. I mean, a lot of it is sometimes a film just really personally connects with you in a way, and you're not sure why, even if you can admit it's not as great. Like, don't get me wrong, I still do honestly believe it's a 9 out of 10, but like probably a weaker 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 than the rest of the films on this list. So as I say, sometimes, you know, it's just the characters that connect with you. Something about Ralph and Vanellope's journey just and their characters just hits all the right notes for me. Even if I can see in some aspects, like for instance, I have met people that like almost everything about this film, but just don't warm up to Vanellope. And I suppose in some aspects, like she starts out as the sort of screechy, snappy, hyperactive child that, you know, just won't leave you alone even when you tell her to go away at Ralph's poor expense. So it's like in some ways I'm not able to pinpoint what about the characters it is that strikes me. Like don't get me wrong, I can't say things I like about them, but I'm not sure what it is that sort of clicks with me. I mean, I still do think that in many ways it is a very, very well done film, like the layers to Ralph's journey in a way that, you know, works for kids but is intellectually stimulating for adults. All that stuff outside the mountain about having to make the hard choices, like even if it turns out King Candy was lying to him, it still reigns true for the journey. And obviously the whole villain cliche, surprise villain twist, did get overplayed, but it does work in this one. Firstly because, well, we know King Candy is the villain. The film never denies that. The twist is not that he's the villain, but that he's somebody else. So that still works in that regard. And because King Candy and Turbo still ends up being such a great mirror foil to Ralph, that's the interesting thing in the film's history. Like before it, it's Vanellope that he's had all the, you know, contact with, but in the film, him and King Candy and Vanellope never interact except for the scene where he's revealed. It's only King Candy and Ralph, and it keeps driving home the parallels between them. But yeah, I can understand why, even just talking recent Disney films, I can understand why someone would prefer Big Hero 6, or why someone would prefer Zootopia, or just on the princess films, why Moana or Tangled would dig deeper. Like, so as I say, even though I still do honestly believe this film is as objectively as great as it is in number one for mostly personal reasons. Again, it's the same thing I say with A Bug's Life. It's not their best film, but it is my favorite. Yeah. Shoot me.
No, I think that's great. I mean, everybody knows that I have my issues with Wreck-It Ralph, but I you know, this is a celebration we're talking about, and so I think that I don't hate it. I think it can be quite funny, and I think some of the animation is beautiful, and I think that Ralph is a great lead character. I think that the whole idea of a guy that doesn't want to be the bad guy anymore is a really, really lovely character arc for him, and I think the voice casting was brilliant for John C. Reilly for Wreck-It Ralph, and I love Fix-It and Calhoun. I think are really funny, and I like them they become a couple. That's great. So there's definitely a lot to like about Wreck-It Ralph, and I can see why it would be your favorite. Ryan, what do you think about Wreck-It Ralph?
I love certain parts of Wreck-It Ralph. Like my favorite scene in the whole movie is when Ralph is falling into the Mentos and Coke volcano, and he knows that that's pretty much be his end, and he's like, and he recites the pledge that has basically been beaten into his brain at the villain AA meetings, as I call them. Like, I'm
Mhm.
bad, but that's good. I'm not good, but that's not bad. And like that moment there just
Yeah.
was like he's finally realizing who he is. But you know what? That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing.
Mhm.
It's the smaller moments in that movie that I love the most. You come for the video game references, but you stay for
Yeah.
the story. There's a legitimate
Mhm.
beating heart within the story of Wreck-It Ralph,
Yeah.
and that's something that I do appreciate.
I think so. I agree. Well, very good. That's a really good list. All right, Ryan, what's your number one?
All right, going back to the Dark Horse Well, and we're going to be paying tribute to the beautiful folks over at Leica Studios and my number one, Kubo and the Two Strings.
Oh, interesting.
Oh,
Cool.
good
I
pick.
have loved this movie since I saw it in theaters, and I have not stopped thinking about it since then. This is by far and away Leica's most beautiful looking movie, and
Mhm.
this is the company that made Coraline and Paranorman, which are equally as beautiful. It has a fantastic story involving, mythology, but also relatable things. Great voice acting across the board. You have Charlize Theron voicing a monkey, and Matthew McConaughey voicing a beetle. It's the casting choice I had no idea I wanted, but then I got it, and I absolutely love it. And I have no idea how Travis Knight was able to accomplish this, but he made George Takei sound threatening. Like, how was that possible? I still have no idea.
Yeah.
But what I love the most about Kubo and the Two Strings is just it has just the theme of you have to grow up and you have to just you have to grow up and you have to take things on head on. You can't run away from it. You have to run face first at it. And if it doesn't work, then fine. But it would rather it would be preferred if you would rather take it head on and fail than just run away from it forever and never confront it. I just like the spirit of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting choice. I need to watch this movie again because it's been a while since I've seen it. But yeah, especially visually, it was a dazzling film. Absolutely beautiful, and just especially the sequence where he dives down into the water. That whole was just so beautiful how they could get water like that with the stop motion and the way they were able to it's a really interesting choice for sure. Yeah, like I wasn't a huge fan honestly of their movie last year, but but I've loved almost every movie that they have made. I love Coraline and Paranorman, and I mean they just have such a beautiful visual style and really offer very pure characters who it's easy to connect with. And whether it's Norman or Coraline, or I think they do a good job, especially with their lead characters. So, what do you think of Kubo, Mike?
Oh, well, this is another film that I haven't seen in a while, and I do need to rewatch. So
Mhm.
thank you for that. Um, it's interesting because like obviously I'm an animation buff. I like Leica as much as the next person, even if a lot of their work doesn't sort of penetrate me the way Aardman's work does. Even if I guess what I'm saying is like even when I love their films, sometimes they don't keep me awake at night the way a Wallace and Gromit or a Chicken Run or a Shaun the Sheep does. And I
Mhm.
suppose another thing is that I for a long while I believed their films seemed to be diminishing. Like they went from Coraline, which I thought was a near masterpiece, to Paranorman, which I thought was great, to Box Trolls, which I found goodish, but I'm starting to be alarmed at the decline quality. But then this one comes back and it's right back up there with Coraline. Also, the other three films were all vaguely children's horror stories, whereas that one, I mean, there's still a bit of that in there, but it's
Mhm.
not, it's not a genre film the way the other three were.
Yeah.
So it was a very interesting shift of direction. in that aspect.
Kubo's more of an adventure story with some
Yeah,
horror
of course.
thrown in there,
Yeah.
especially from the Moon King. Sheesh.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Very interesting.
In many ways, it feels like the closest thing we'll get to an animated Legend of Zelda film, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
That's what everyone keeps telling me. I tell them I like Kubo, and when I describe it, they're like, "Oh, so like Legend of Zelda?" I'm like, "Okay, sure."
Yeah. Well, very good. I really like, let's quick go over our 5 picks. So mine was Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and then Inside Out, Tangled, Song of the Sea, and Your Name. And Mike, what was yours?
So fifth was Shaun of the Sheep. Fourth was Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Third was How to Train Your Dragon. Second was Inside Out, and first was Wreck-It Ralph.
Great. And then Ryan, yours?
My number 5 was The Adventures of Tintin. My number 4 was Rango. Number 3 was Inside Out. Number 2 was Into the Spider-Verse. And number 1 was Kubo and the Two Strings.
Great. Well, I love our lists, and I think we can safely say that the Inside Out and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse were the two best of the cumulative. It was on all 3 of our lists. So those are the 2 best of the decade. So I think that's pretty two solid choices. So thank you guys so much for coming and doing this. This was really fun, and I really enjoyed talking about these with you. And so, Mike, where can people find you on social media and your channel and everything?
Okay, so my channel's name is Cartoon Karma. You can find it on YouTube, obviously, and on Facebook. And then on Twitter, it's Toon Karma. So yeah, that's where I'll show up.
Great. And Ryan, where can people find you?
You can find me on my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search Ryan Cam or Ryan Cam Movie Reviews. I normally appear at the top of the search bar when you do that. But on my Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, it's Ryan Cam 20.
Great. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all of our social media, iTunes, YouTube, all over the place. So check that out. And please subscribe to our channel. If you're listening on iTunes, please leave your ratings and reviews. And really appreciate you guys coming on and talking about this. And we'll have to get together and have talk about animation again soon. So really appreciate it. And have a great beginning of your Happy New Year. So, all right. We'll talk to you all later. Bye.